Welcome to the first of two sessions to cover the upgrade to Evergreen 3.15 that NC Cardinal will be conducting over the weekend of November 1st. Today, we're going to just kind of cover what you can expect with that upgrade, both in the process of the upgrade itself, if you have not done one of these before, as well as the changes that will be coming with the new version of the software. The chat is available if you have questions as we go, and I invite you to please share those questions or concerns, and we will do our best to address them. Of course, every upgrade comes with some surprises once we roll out everything to kind of the larger audience and we have lots of people using it in real time. We always get a few things that we weren't anticipating. So in the weeks following the upgrade, we also invite you to share your reactions and what you experience, either in Basecamp or via tickets, so that we can address things as they come up. But today we will be talking about what to expect and how the changes to the software are going to affect your workflow. So we will start by talking about who this affects, what the kind of process looks like, and when the process will be happening. And then we'll go over the minor changes that you'll be seeing. And so that would mostly be aesthetic things or things that don't change the functionality really, but just, maybe change the surface level interaction. And then we'll talk about the major changes, and we will demonstrate things as we go, be able to see them live. If you have not yet had a chance to check out the new version of the software, it is available on our next server. And so that's something that you can go and take a look at any time. There is a Basecamp group that's been doing a lot of that testing work for us. It's been very active on Basecamp. There's still time to join that if you're interested. But let me grab the next server, the link to the next server uh, list, and I'll put that in chat. So you can go into this in the knowledge books to find the link to your library's next interface. So you can log in there and kind of play around with this prior to the actual upgrade going through. And I do invite you to do that if you have not done it yet. So let's start with the who, what, when. For the most part, who does this affect? Well, really, it does affect everybody, but the group that is going to be most affected by the changes we'll be seeing in this upgrade are catalogers. The main areas of change are related to cataloging, primarily with the holdings editor and record buckets, but there are, some aspects of those cataloging interfaces that get used by circulators depending on what your library's workflow is and what your staffing model looks like. You may have some circulators as well as people in other areas of the library who will be touching those same interfaces in terms of record buckets and holdings editors. Additionally, there are a couple of bug fixes and things like that that are going to affect staff from all departments. In addition to catalogers and circulators, administrators are also going to potentially see some things depending on what the administrative work you do is and how that work interacts with cataloging primarily. So, for example, there are changes to the way that holdings editor templates and item attribute templates are created and managed, and a lot of times administrators are the ones who are doing that management. So there are some changes there that may affect your workflow, depending on what that workflow is to begin with. If your role falls outside of one of these three areas, chances are you're still going to see changes as a result of this upgrade, whether it's because you find yourself in the holdings editor occasionally, or you find yourself working with record buckets occasionally, or there are bug fixes and accessibility issues sprinkled throughout the upgrade that may affect you, even if it's just a slight visual change. Knowing that it's coming will be useful. So I recommend that everyone who is going to be interacting with Evergreen after the upgrade spend some time getting to know the changes that we're expecting. What to expect with the upgrade. So if this is your first upgrade, I'll just walk through the process of it. We are actually expecting a very straightforward and efficient upgrade this year. It's a slightly smaller one than some of the previous ones we've done. The system will go offline after 6 p.m. on Saturday, November 1st. So all of our libraries should be closed at the point that we take it offline. So you should not need to worry about using offline circulation or anything like that on Saturday. But for those libraries that are still open on Sundays, you may need to use offline mode for that. So if you are open on Sunday, November 2nd, you should assume that you will be using offline mode. We did a webinar last week going over offline circulation, and I will put a link in the chat to the YouTube recording of that session. So if you are not familiar with offline circulation or you haven't used it since last year's upgrade, and you just need a refresher, you can take a look at that video to get kind of a review of the offline circulation. If you are not open on Sundays, you probably won't need to use offline mode at all because we do expect the upgrade to be complete before the end of the day on Sunday. So by Monday morning, we do expect that the software to be fully upgraded. During the time that we're offline though, so starting around 6 p.m. on Saturday all the way through Sunday, um, your patrons will be able to access online resources for the most part. Those SIP servers that we use will continue to be functional. If you have very new patrons, it's possible that they might have some connectivity issues. So, be prepared for that. But for the most part, SIP should continue to function as expected for things like authenticating cards for Libby and Overdrive and things like that. The only exception to this is self-check machines. So if you are open on Sunday and you have self-check machines, you need to alert your patrons that those will not be functional on Sunday. And you should plan to do all of your circulation at the circulation desk using offline mode. Another thing to be aware of is that scheduled reports will not run while the system is offline. So if you have recurring reports that run, at midnight on the 2nd or something like that, basically be prepared for those to not work. And that's especially important because once a recurrence is skipped on a report, it won't pick up again. So you do need to make sure that you're kind of prepared for any reports that may be missed. And if you need some help adjusting the date for the next recurrence, let us know. So just go in and check any recurring reports that you know will come over the course of this weekend and see when they're scheduled for. If you are not familiar with that process, I will very briefly show it to you. I don't have any myself that are set. Oh, this is not the right. But I will show you where you would find that information. So if you go into the reporter and you go to your outputs folder, just choose whatever folder your recurring report would be in. Up here in this pending section, the next scheduled runtime will show up here. So if you have something that is scheduled to run November 2nd, that will be here. Now, those reports that are scheduled to run November 1st, as long as it's prior to 6 p.m., you should be fine on. So if you have reports that run on the 1st of every month and you have them to run at like 6 a.m., you'll be fine. You don't need to worry about those. It's only those that are scheduled to run after 6 p.m. on November 1st through November 2nd. We expect everything to be up and running again by November 3rd. So you shouldn't have to worry about that. If you have any that are like right on the dot of midnight on November 3rd, it might be worth taking a look at that. But for the most part, we're just worried about that post 6 p.m. on the 1st through November 2nd. So you can check any that you have scheduled here. If you're not sure, if you don't know what account reports are running off of or something like that, go ahead and submit a ticket and we can do a quick check to see if there's anything set for your library for that time. And we'll deal with it if we find anything. Any questions about that, about reports or anything? Okay, another thing to be aware of is that notices will not be going out to patrons while the system is offline. This is less concerning than reports because it's not going to cause a sort of a backlog. But just be aware that overdue notices and things like that will not be going out automatically during that offline period. So those are sort of the things to be aware of during that offline period. If you do have any questions, please feel free to reach out. A lot of those questions may be answered in the offline training. So if you weren't able to attend that, I do recommend taking a look at that recording. So I've already sort of said when this is happening, but officially I will say it now. And that is that Saturday, November 1st through Sunday, November 2nd, the start time will be at some point after 6 p.m. So your library should be closed by the time we start it. And we've been told by Mobius that this particular upgrade could be as quick as just a few hours. So it's possible that we'll come back online at some point on Sunday, but we are recommending that people expect it to be down throughout Sunday. And then we really do expect it to be fully up and upgraded by the time you open up on Monday morning. So those are just kind of the basic housekeeping things, the details about the process. Are there questions about any of that? Well, let's go ahead and take a look at our minor changes. And so these are basically things that are not functional changes. They are tweaks to existing functions. Most of them are going to be primarily aesthetic or have something to do with the accessibility of an existing function, things like that. So none of them are really huge, and there's also several bug fixes that we'll be talking about today. One of the minor changes that's coming up is the ability to set some new search preferences. So when conducting a search in the staff client catalog, users can set preferences for how the search will function and the options that may appear in that search. So this is something that came a couple of upgrades ago. All of the standard options that exist now will remain intact, but 315 will bring a few new options. So you'll be able to set the default to limit to available. So currently when you do a search in the catalog, you have the option to limit to available each time you do a search. If that is something that you always want to be able to start with, so for example, if you're primarily searching the catalog to help patrons find items that are on the shelves, then you may want your default setting to be limiting to available items. And if that's the case, you can set that to be the default. And of course, you can always turn it off as needed. You can also default to group formats and editions. So I'm not sure how heavily this option is used to begin with, but it basically allows you to get a single result line item for any title that essentially matches. Meaning that if you did a search for Percy Jackson, and you were grouping by format and edition, then you would get a single kind of line item for Percy Jackson and the Olympians for the book, for the audiobook, for the playaway, as well as also probably the DVD. And so this is useful if you are searching for something like Percy Jackson, where there's going to be just really a lot that comes back in that search, and you kind of want to be able to get a snapshot of each different phase within the series, I guess, and then be able to go into that to figure out the different editions and formats that are available. So I'll show you that very briefly. When you are in the upgraded version, let me make this a little bit bigger. And you go to do a catalog search. This search preferences button has been there for a while, and it will continue to be available in the same place. When you click on it, you can set your search preferences, and you can choose default groups to formats and editions. And then you can also default limit to available. That one that we just talked about is here as well. Once you've done that, you click the return button, and now your search is going to just sort of default to that thing that you've just selected. And so you can see this checkbox. This is always visible if you have it to default to that, it will remain checked. If you decide you no longer want to use it, you can uncheck it manually. And then the next time you return to the catalog, the preference will still be set and it'll come back checked the next time you come to do a search. But if we did our search for Percy Jackson with this group formats and editions checked, then, so for example, Percy Jackson Sea of Monsters, you're getting the Blu-ray and DVD title records are kind of connected together here. And if I click on that, then I'm going to get, I'm going to go into the next view of my search, which is going to give me the separate records. So if that's not a function that you're familiar with, I just wanted to show it briefly because now you can make it a default function. So depending on what you're doing your catalog searches for most of the time, this can be useful. Another new search preference is the ability to highlight search terms. So if I go into my search preferences and I choose to highlight search terms, then whenever I do a search, then these search terms within the record that match my search will be highlighted. And that's, you know, that's always been a thing that's available, but now you have the ability to default to always have it on or default to always have it off. So a couple of new things, nothing huge. And then of course, all your regular things in terms of your default sort and preferred library, your sort order, the search results per page, those are all still available. Exclude electronic resources has always been a preference that's available in this interface, and that is still here. But you just have a few new ones. Let's see, we've got a question. Why were some of the results not highlighting Percy Jackson in that example? I think because I'm still in this default group formats and editions. So it was probably only highlighting the sort of top level version of the record. Yeah, so if I turn that off, basically before I was looking at that sort of second level view that happened because of the grouping formats. If I turn that off, then I'm back to that top level view where each of these is a different search result. Whereas the first one, they weren't really search results. They were contained within a larger search. So yeah, now it's showing up for all of them. And if I actually turned this back on, and yeah, basically these first few are all related. They're all Sea of Monsters. And then I come down here and I get Lightning Thief. Percy Jackson is highlighted again once I'm sort of past that first grouping. I'm not sure why that is the choice to make for that functionality, but that's, I think, what's going on. All right, any other questions about any of the search preferences? As I said, the ability to set your search preferences is not new. It's just a couple of new options within that menu. All right, one of the big things that's coming that we've definitely been going back and forth with a lot of people on is dark mode. So you do have the ability in this upgrade to turn on a dark mode, which I know we've had a lot of requests for in previous surveys and things like that. It still has some bugs to it. So if this is something that you want to use, certainly go for it, but be prepared to sometimes want to turn it off because there are parts where the contrast just isn't coming through as strongly as it should. But for the most part, you know, it's going to give you what you want in terms of giving you that sort of dark background and reducing eye strain and all that. There are two options for dark mode. You can turn it on and off manually, or you can set it to automatically match your operating system settings. So if you have your computer set to already automatically utilize dark mode for anything that has it, then you can make it so that Evergreen will follow those settings. And then you can also manually turn it off from there if you find that you're in a page that's that has some contrast issues. And Llewellyn is mentioning that there is a pretty frustrating contrast issue with the holdings editor in dark mode right now. So, you know, if you are a cataloger and a lot of the work that you're doing is in the holdings editor, dark mode may not be for you. But, you know, I do recommend that people, once we have the upgrade in place, go on in, turn on dark mode, see if it works for you. It's easy to turn on and off. And I will show you that process. And Will is also saying the enhanced mark editor is also seeing some problems in specific circumstances. I've seen a lot of chatter about those recently. The option to turn it on and off is up here next to the sort of settings menu up at the top. It's just this little brightness icon. So if I click on that, I can manually put it into dark mode. I can also set it to auto. My operating system is not set with dark mode currently, so if I have it on auto, it's going to stay in light mode. If my operating system was set to be in dark mode, then it would automatically go to dark mode. Regardless of how I have it set in this way, I can turn it on and off manually at any point. So if I am looking at dark mode, I can come in here, this is what the catalog search looks like. We can do a quick search so you kind of see the results. And so see that highlighting is a little unpleasant within dark mode. And then when you have this kind of grayer text, the highlighting is especially, the contrast is basically non-existent there. If we go into an actual record, and I'll show you that holdings editor bug. So like this is good contrast, what we're seeing here in this particular grid. If we go into our holdings editor, then this is what we're seeing. And then if we attempt to make changes to things, we get some odd coloration here. So just play around with it, see which interfaces work for you and which ones don't. We'll take a quick look at the enhanced mark editor as well. So at its base level, it looks all right, but I think that there are, somebody mentioned something about things not working very well once you start actually working with it. And I know within buckets, there are some contrast issues as well. So play around with it and see if it works for you, if this is something you're interested in. And once you decide that it doesn't work on a specific interface, you can always turn it off while in that particular interface. Another thing that I wanted to bring up, this is actually not part of the upgrade. This is something that was available in the last upgrade, but we did not turn it on yet. We are turning it on now, and that is the ability to make duplicate holds, which basically means that for certain account types, you can place multiple holds on the same title record. So we've limited this to staff accounts and institutional accounts. The option is only going to be available in the staff client, not the OPAC, so patrons wouldn't be able to do this themselves. And because it's limited to staff and institutional accounts, you know, that's already not an issue because for the most part, this is something that's going to be done in-house for the libraries. So really the idea behind this is to make book clubs more functional. I know that there are a lot of different ways that libraries place holds for book clubs, and we're hoping that this simplifies that process a little bit. Basically, when placing a standard title hold, so not copy level holds, but actual title holds where it's on the entire record and any copy attached to that record could potentially fulfill the hold, you can now ask for multiple copies to fulfill that hold. So rather than going in and placing, say, 15 different copy level holds for your book club institutional or staff account, you can now go in and place a single title level hold and request 15 copies of it. we'll take a quick look at it. We have currently limited this to 15 copies, so that is the total number that would be available. And it's, as I said, it's only for staff and institutional accounts. Hold on just a second. There was a question in chat about dark mode. I'm curious why the colors in the holdings editor are so much brighter than in the current version. I feel like the current colors wouldn't be quite so annoying contrasted with the dark mode. So there were some significant changes to the holdings editor that we'll look at. So some of it is that because the colors in the holdings editor itself have changed a bit with this upgrade. So part of it's that, and part of it I think is just that there's some wonkiness with a few things. And as Will's saying, a lot of the color changes that we're going to see in this upgrade have to do with accessibility. So it is a dark mode, I think, is classified as a work in progress in some senses as well. So and we'll see what future upgrades do with dark mode. All right, so let's take a quick look at the duplicate holds option here. So if I were to say I want to place a hold on this, well, this isn't a great option because I don't think there are very many copies of it. So let me go back into my search. So if I had a book club that needed, say, 10 copies of a particular book, I could come down into that book record. So rather than placing copy level holds, I'm going to place a title level hold, which means that any copies available to fulfill will be pulled right away, regardless of which copies I select, because I don't have to select any. I'm going to put in an institutional account here. And when I do that, when I put in the barcode for an account that is one of the two accounts that we set this up for, so either a staff account or an institutional account, I get this new line down here at the bottom for number of copies. And I can just select the total number of copies that I need to fulfill this hold. And then I click place hold as I normally would. Oh, I thought I actually updated that yesterday, but then I would basically be placing a full 10 holds all on the same title record. So a lot faster than placing 10 individuals, and also should be fulfilled more efficiently because they're all title level holds rather than copy level holds. Any questions about that process? Right. Another small change is actually sort of good. I'm glad Brunswick is happy to be able to use that. I think we have a lot of libraries that have methods of placing holds for book clubs that they're not thrilled with. So hopefully that makes that more efficient. Currently 15 is the highest number that we can go to for this. If you have book clubs that very regularly go above 15, reach out. We can consider upping that, or if working with you to figure out the best way to manage that. So if that is a very standard situation that you need more than 15 copies, let us know. All right. Any other questions about the holds? All right, well, let's talk briefly about nullability in reports. This is the only really big report change that we're having this year. In last year's upgrade, the reporter was completely overhauled, and one of the things that was significantly changed was nullability, and it was simplified. So Cindy asked if patrons will be able to use the OPAC during the upgrade. I'm pretty sure that will not be available. Llewellyn or Benjamin, if you're in here, are you Is there any way that we're going to make that available during the upgrade? I know they definitely would not be able to place holds, but I'm not sure that, yeah, I don't think the OPAC's going to be available. And I think we actually usually put up a message saying that there's an upgrade going on and letting people know when they can come back. But if that is incorrect or if there's additional information, if somebody else from the Cardinal team is aware of, please feel free to just unmute or throw it in chat. Yeah, Deborah's saying that in past upgrades it has not been. Okay, yep, and Benjamin has confirmed that it will be down. Thank you. So in last year's upgrade, one of the things that was changed was that nullability was simplified, and it was very simplified to the point that there was only one join type available, and it also was not particularly well labeled. So that has been addressed in this upgrade. There are now multiple join types available, and there's also a label that shows that what you're doing when you apply nullability is applying nullability and a little bit about what that means, basically using a Venn diagram. Additionally, this was a big bug that caused a lot of problems. Templates that had been created prior to 3.13 that had nullability, if they were cloned in 3.13, that nullability was essentially wiped, but it usually caused the report to fail, because it looked like it was trying to apply nullability and then was not, and it made it so that the report was non-functional. So now if you are cloning a report template from before the last upgrade that had nullability in it, that nullability will be retained. So you don't need to reapply it at the point of cloning. So it makes it a lot easier for people who are not, masters with reports, and therefore, very very good at figuring out what needs to be edited at the point of cloning. It makes it much easier for those people to work through a cloned report. It also makes it much easier for people who do want to apply nullability to do that, whether it's a cloned template or a template they're creating themselves. So I will show you briefly what this is going to look like. So if you go into a report and you create a new template, you're now going to see this little diagram next to each table over here in the table pane. This is the nullability indicator. When you click on it, then you can select the type of join you want to do, whether it is a left join or an inner join. For those of you familiar with reports and familiar with nullability, the left join basically means that you'll retain all of the information in the topmost table and then any matching information from the new table. And then an inner join means that only if information matches will it be included. So if you're already, familiar with how nullability works, just know that you now have the ability for an inner join again, which you did not in the most recent upgrade. And you now have the little diagram rather than the checkbox, which alerts you that what you're applying when you're choosing this is nullability, as opposed to simply selecting that table, which I think I did several times when I was first learning the new reporter. Those of you who are not familiar with nullability, you don't need to know any more about it at this point. Obviously, if you want to learn, we'll be doing some training on that over the next year, but it does mean that it's simplified in the sense that you no longer have that kind of confusing checkbox here. Instead, you have this diagram that lets you know that you're applying something a little bit more complex. So this is the only thing to really worry about in reports. Otherwise, we are not pulling the rug out from under people in terms of reports again this year. Right. As we've already kind of alluded to a few times, one of the big areas where we will be seeing some changes in this upgrade is with accessibility. There are a few accessibility enhancements that I wanted to call attention to. There's a lot kind of happening under the hood that will help any users who may be using accessibility software or screen readers or things like that are going to have an easier time of things. But just on the full front end, some of the things you'll see as a result of these accessibility enhancements, one that I'm pretty excited about are the keyboard shortcuts are now going to be visible in menus. So if you like to hit F1 to get to the checkout screen, now when you open up the circulation menu, you'll see that F1 will get you to the checkout screen. So if you're not familiar with the keyboard shortcuts, you now have a guide to them. If you didn't even know there were keyboard shortcuts, now you do, and you get kind of a list embedded into Evergreen of what those keyboard shortcuts are. So that's a new feature for accessibility this year. We also have more consistent labeling of action menus. Some of you may have noticed that occasionally you'll come into a grid with an action menu that's just a little check mark versus the action menu that is actually labeled actions. And most of these have been updated. So for the most part throughout Evergreen, everything's now going to say actions. So when you get to an action menu, you'll know it's an action menu because it's actually labeled as such. Um, Also, as we have seen already, there have been some changes to text color for improved contrast and readability. This does not always look like what we want it to look like. It is not always as pretty as maybe we want it to be, but it is anytime you see those color changes at this point, know that the reason for them is for improved accessibility. So there are several places where the colors that we're used to seeing in different spaces have been changed, and this is the purpose for those. So we talked about it a little bit in terms of the holdings editor. There are other places throughout where you're going to see changes to the colors. And the colors you're used to won't necessarily still be there, both in terms of the text and sometimes the background that that text is on. And then also tabs are going to be more visible. So there are a lot of places. One example is in the catalog import, and I'll show you that in the current version. I keep going into next. When I go to import something in the current version, the tabs are just kind of look like links along the top until I click on it when it becomes highlighted. And that's when I realize that's a tab. In the upgraded version, if I look at um, the same interface, now it is clear that each of these are a tab. And so you'll see that in a few different places throughout. If you had interfaces that had tabs that were not visible as tabs, they have now been made visible as tabs. So those are some of the big accessibility things that are going to be most visible from the front end. You may run into a few other things, but those are the ones that I think are the most kind of obvious. Any questions about any of that? All right, so let's talk about a few bug fixes. There were, I believe I counted and I found that there were a total of 513 bugs fixed in this upgrade. There are only 6 that I'm specifically going to call out today. Otherwise, we need a much, much longer webinar. A lot of those have to do with really back end things, so you're not really going to see a lot of it. They're very niche. Some of them are bug fixes for, we're going from 3.13 to 3.15. So some of those are bugs that came up in 3.14 were fixed in 3.15 and things like that. So they won't even necessarily be on your radar, period. But there were 6 that I wanted to specifically call out. Primarily because these were bugs that came with the last upgrade and they're being addressed in this upgrade. There were issues with the undo redo button in the mark enhanced editor for the fixed fields and the leader fields, and those have been fixed. There were issues with the audience search field in the OPAC and staff catalog, where it was basically really, really broad and it wasn't actually filtering properly. And that's something that if you have been in trainings with me where we've talked about the catalog search, that's something that I've kind of called out as not to use the audience filter. This is supposed to be fixed, so we should be able to use the audience filter when searching now. So that'll be really nice. Um, Additionally, multi-value fixed fields are now going to be displayed as separate single character inputs with combo box suggestions. So that'll be an improvement over the previous version of the enhanced editor that was not working very well for those particular fields. This is something that I know we had a lot of people upset about after the last upgrade, the hold transit source and destination. So if you're looking at the hold grid in a patron's account, for example, you could no longer have it show the source or destination. It gave you the org unit code, which is not readable if nobody has those memorized. So that has been fixed, and so it will now show the actual short names for the libraries that are sending an item to fulfill a hold, and as well as the destination. So you still may need to add that column into your grid. If you do not currently have something shown for that, it's not necessarily going to come up as a default, but you can now add that field to your grid and it will show up in a readable way. And I know we had a lot of people who were not happy about that not being available before. So now this is obviously just the segment of people who utilize acquisitions, but we did have some issues where invoices were not showing all of the available funds when adding like processing fees, direct charges, so processing fees and tax and stuff like that. They weren't being able to see all of their available funds. They were only able to see funds for their specific branch, and that didn't make sense if you were doing acquisitions ordering outside of your branch. That has been fixed, so you should now be able to see all of your branch's funds throughout your system and not just for your specific branch where you're logged in. And then within the reporter, one of the kind of confusing things with filters was that if you were doing a filter on something like a stat cat, where your library has a stat cat for donations, and then 3 other libraries have a stat cat for donations, the list that would come up for the filter would have donations, 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 and it wouldn't explain which library owned which one, so you didn't know which one to choose. That has been fixed, and it's now going to either limit those types of things to only show the options available for your workstation, or it will designate which library owns something. So different ones will do different things kind of depending on the situation. But you will no longer hopefully run into filters where the list of available options gives you options belonging to many libraries and no indication of which ones are yours. So I'm hoping that that makes a big difference for people who are working with those types of reports. If you are interested in taking a look at the other 507 bugs that are being addressed, the release notes do go through each of those. So you can go and take a look at those release notes to find out about other bug fixes. And then, any bugs that have been sent forward by us that are not being addressed in this particular upgrade, we will continue watching them, continuing recommending that people add heat to them if they are running across the same issues, and hopefully they'll either be patches or a future upgrade will address any bug fixes outside of those that have been addressed in this upgrade. But these are the six that I identified as particular issues for our consortium that have been addressed. Any questions about any of these? All right, well, next we are going to go into looking at our major changes, but before we do that, I do want to take a 5-minute break before we take our break, are there any questions about anything we've talked about so far, or concerns or anything like that? Let's see. An example of the last bug fix. So the best example of that one is StatCats. So if I look in the current version and I go into reports, I don't have one like off the top of my head for this, but let's see if I can kind of force an example. Um, if I were to set a filter for a StatCat, not sure if it's going to be name or ID. Yeah. So if I have a filter for a StatCat ID and I'm looking at the list, see, I have all of these for award. I don't know which library owns which of these. So if I'm in, Buncombe County and I select this one, and I know we have a StatCat for award, but this happens to be Iredell's StatCat for award, and I select it, then the filter's not gonna work for me because you know, if I have another filter for only items owned by my library, none of them are going to have Iredell's StatCat applied to them. So in the new version, if I attempt the same thing, let's see, that was StatCat ID. I'm trying to remember how I tested this when I was putting this together because I know I got it working. Off the top of my head, I don't remember how I did that. Also, the reporter is always funky in Next because it's not really turned on in a way that it works properly. Well, it will say in parentheses next to those awards, it'll say which library owns them. And I'm sorry that I can't get that to show up right now. But any other questions related to that or other bugs or anything else that we've talked about up to this point? All right, well, let's take a 5-minute break. And if you do come up with questions during that time, we can address them when we get back. I'll set a timer and I will see everybody back here in 5 minutes. All right, it's been 5 minutes, so hopefully everybody had a chance to stretch and we can get back to it. Are there any questions about anything we've covered so far, whether it is the upgrade process itself, questions about offline, or any of the smaller changes that we've gone over? Deborah asked whether StatCats will be a usable filter in reports now. They should be. I would suggest, because of course in Next you can't really do a lot to test reports. I would suggest going in and maybe doing a test report on Monday or Tuesday of next week with StatCats and just kind of see what happens before you do it for real. Um, and I mean, it seems like a good thing to have usable in terms of reporting, since the point of StatCats kind of to be to is for statistical categories, and so therefore you should be able to run reports on them. But I'd test it for real once we're live, and that's one of those things that if there is anything about that bug fix that is not working as intended, the we'll we'll get that out there to the development community, and I would expect that to be addressed pretty quickly, if it's possible to address it quickly, just because, it was a bug fix that had a lot of back and forth and stuff like that, that was, people were excited about with this upgrade. So, um, yeah, so test it out. I'll test it out myself once we're live as well. And if there's anything about it that's not working as expected, then we will see what we can do about it. Any other questions? All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the major changes. So basically the things where there are actual completely new interfaces or significant functionality changes within an existing interface. And there are really only two in this upgrade. The first is in record buckets, and the second is in the holdings editor. And we already talked very, very briefly about the holdings editor, but we'll look at it in more detail. The bigger of the two changes is record buckets. So those have been completely overhauled and have a lot of functionality changes in terms of both how you are creating record buckets and then how you're sharing them, as well as some changes to how you're able to interact with them. The general concept is the same in that record buckets allow you to do things like merge duplicate records, and do a little bit of batch editing, and then also batch deleting. But so there's no new functionality in that sense, but simply the management of the records has changed significantly. So that's what we'll look at. The big changes within the record buckets are that the grids themselves have changed. You both have updates to the grids that you see within a bucket, but has now been now you're going to see actual grids for the buckets themselves. So your list of buckets will come in a grid rather than in the drop-down menu they were in before. Um, this the grid of those buckets will include not only the buckets that you create, but it's also going to include buckets that are created because of as part of an ingest queue. And you always have the ability to save a queue to a bucket, but you're now going to be able to just actually see that queue directly in your bucket list. Additionally, you can see OPAC created buckets. So any title list that's created in the OPAC is technically a bucket. Functionality wise, that's what it is. You now have the ability to see those on the staff end. And since, for the most part, if staff are creating a list, they're going to be doing that in the staff client. That's not a huge deal, but you now have the ability, if a patron is creating a list that they would like to share with library staff, if they make that list shareable and give library staff the ID number of the list, library staff can now see that list. So you have the ability for, you know, a patron-led book club to create a book list of things that they'd like to have for their book club and then share it with their staff, the staff person who's running the club. You can also, there are a lot of different programming things that could come from this, creating book bags for juvenile patrons or extra outreach services to institutions where, if you have a nursing home where they don't have individual accounts for for people who reside in the nursing home for residents, that nursing home could still create a book list of different titles that their residents have requested, and they could put that on a book list, make that book list shareable with the library, and then when the library is pulling things to send to that nursing home, say on a monthly basis, they can pull from that list. So there are some new functionalities that are going to be available because of this sharing function between the OPAC and the staff client. Additionally, and these are things that I think a lot of people are really excited about once they hear about them, there are new ways to add records to a bucket, and we'll talk about those ways in a little bit more detail in a moment, and then new methods of sharing record buckets. So let's talk a little bit about those aspects of it. So if I come into the bucket view, this is what I'm seeing now. So this is my list of buckets. And you can see over here in this column for type, Vandelay queue means something that was brought in via that importer. Staff client means a bucket that I created or somebody else created and shared with me. And book bag is one of those OPAC lists. This pub column basically lets me know if this has been shared. So obviously, in the case where a patron has shared their book list with me, it's going to be yes, because it had to be shared to be given to me. If I create a book list within the OPAC, then it's not necessarily going to be public. So it can be no and a book bag if I created it myself. You also have this little actions column over here, which gives you some quick things that you can do with these individual buckets without having to even open them. So I can click edit, and that's going to bring me into the bucket where I can make edits to it. I can create carousel. So you've always been able to create carousels from buckets, but it's been a little bit of a clunky process. It's been streamlined a bit. Share, so we'll talk about sharing, and then I can also delete the bucket itself. So this bucket has nothing in it. It was obviously, it was created 2 years ago from an import queue. It was obviously a failed import. I can just go ahead and delete that. And so now it's not in my bucket list anymore. So this is what you now have available rather than that drop-down menu of different buckets. And then like any grid, I can determine what I'd like to see. So for example, if I want to see the owner of different buckets, I can turn that one on so I can view, especially with this patron created buckets, that's really useful. And that also allows me to see things that were shared and who they were shared from and all that. So that's kind of your basic overview of what this bucket list looks like now. In terms of the functionality, the two big changes to the functionality of buckets involve how you can get title records into a bucket, and then how you can share a bucket. So let's take a closer look at that. So one of the easiest ways you can add things to a bucket now is we have this search function. So the older version of buckets did have a search function. It was not very user friendly. Let's just take a quick look at it for those of you who may not have used it before. It was this record query tab. And you could do a search, and sometimes that search was fairly straightforward and would work, and sometimes it was a little bit more, required a little bit more finesse. Um, Now this is just a basic catalog search, and it's embedded right here, so you don't have to go to a different tab. So Cindy asked if you'll receive a notification when a patron shares a bucket with you. So a patron can't share a bucket with you directly. All they can do is turn on sharing. And then if they want to share it with somebody specific, they can contact that person with the bucket information. So you'll get a notification if they contact you. Um, so if that makes sense. Yeah. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a minute when we talk about sharing. So I could do a search in the catalog, and then I can add things to the bucket from that search immediately. So that's not a huge difference from before. It's a little bit more user friendly. It's a little bit, it's embedded directly, so you don't have to go to a different spot for it, but it's not a huge functionality change. What is that I now have the ability to import a list of TCNs. So if I come into my, first I have to select the bucket I would like to import them into. So I'm going to create a new bucket. And in my new bucket, oh, one thing I didn't mention is that because we're in this grid is now grid is now both sortable and filterable. So I could come into this column for name, and I could sort for to make it Z to A sorting, and that's going to bring webinar right up here to the top. I can also filter by clicking on this little upside down pyramid. And I could say I only want buckets that contain the word webinar. And so that's going to allow me to kind of sort. So if you have a lot of buckets, this is really nice. So once I have found the bucket that I'd like to populate, I can select it. And then from the actions menu, I can upload records. So this is huge. This is a new feature, and the people that have heard about it that work with record buckets a lot are pretty excited about it. I'm pretty excited about it. I can take a list of TCNs that I have available in a CSV or text file, and I can import them. So that brought in 99 record buckets or records directly into this bucket. So I can click on that bucket and I can go in and I can see those, all of those titles that I just imported. So that's huge. Another thing that you can do is you can bring records into a bucket from a report. So if I am in the reporter, and I go into run a report, when I go into the layout and scheduling tab for that report, so I'm not creating a template, I'm just running the report off of an existing template, and I go into this final step of doing that process, I now have bibliographic record bucket options here. So I can, that wasn't the right report. I've lost the report that I made for this, but I will basically choose which column the TCN is in, and then I choose the I put in the record bucket ID for where I'd like to import the TCNs that are generated by this report. And then when I run the report, not only will I get my output, but it will also populate that bucket. Um, I imagine that this is coming for item buckets in the future as well. I'm not sure off the top of my head what the discussion around that might be. I think Llewellyn is probably the source for that. But I imagine that item buckets is kind of next on the list. Um, yeah. So you're able to create a bucket based on a report, as well as obviously, you can upload. So if you run a report with TCNs and you want to then edit that output prior to putting it in a bucket, you can do that and then save it as a CSV and then upload that CSV as well. Yep. And Benjamin, I know Benjamin is very excited about the record bucket import options. And he looks like he's also excited about the idea of potentially having it for items. Llewellyn is saying that a lot of the code for record buckets is generic enough that it seems like it'd be adaptable for item buckets. So, hopefully that's something we see in another upgrade. Um, Yeah, I'd love to see that as well. I work with item buckets more than record buckets actually, so I would especially enjoy having these features. So those are your new options for importing. And then of course you can still import kind of one at a time or add things to buckets from the record itself, or from a catalog search. So all of those standard methods of populating a bucket still exist. You just have these two additional ways that make it really, really easy to do a record, to create a record bucket in batch like that. So the other major functionality change here is sharing. So of course, traditionally when sharing a bucket, you make the bucket shareable when you create it, and then you send the ID number, which is right here, to anybody that you would like to have access to that particular bucket. Um, it is now much more nuanced. So if I come into, oh, let me go back to my bucket grid and we'll come back to my webinar bucket. If I come into my actions menu, I now have the option to share bucket. And when I do that, I get this pop-up that's very similar to if you've ever placed a hold and then searched for the patron after getting to the hold interface. It's a very similar interface here. So I can first see anyone I've already shared it with, or I can add users to the list. And so now there are two different ways that sharing has become more nuanced. The first is I now have the ability to share either view permissions or edit permissions. So I can share this bucket with somebody only for them to see what's in it. They wouldn't be able to make any changes, or in a way that would allow them to add new items, remove items, and then work with those records that are in there. Um, Permission groups are still part of this. So like, if I share a bucket with somebody who does not have bibliographic cataloging permissions, it doesn't matter how I share it with them. They're not going to be able to, merge records or anything like that. So the actual cataloging functionality related to it is still based on permission level, but the ability to interact with the bucket itself, you can now set to either view or edit. So I can share it in either of those ways. Now, if I want to give view permissions, I can click here for add users, and then I can search for the users that I would like to add. So I just fill out this with whoever I would like to add, and I search, and then once somebody comes up from the actions menu, I can add them. The same is available with edit permissions. So I can take somebody with view permissions and I can switch them over to edit permissions, or vice versa. I can also remove users. So if I'm just sharing a bucket temporarily with somebody, I can remove that sharing once they no longer need it. So of course, this gives you the ability to really target who you're sharing the bucket with. I can also share it across libraries. So if I am creating a bucket and I'd like everybody at my branch to be able to access that bucket, I could come in and select my branch. And then anybody who is logged in at a working location that matches my branch would be able to view or edit that bucket depending on how I set it. I can also set it across my system. So anybody who's logged in that system would have that access. So this is similar to how some aspects of the reporter work in terms of sharing reports. But then on top of that, location specific sharing, you can also do the specific user sharing. So this gives you a lot more control over who has access to which buckets and how. So those are your two really big changes with record buckets. Are there any questions about either of those? Or anything related to record buckets? Um, you do have the ability up here to look specifically at buckets that have been shared with you. So I can click shared with me, and this will be any bucket that somebody has shared with me that is editable. So shared with me means buckets I can edit. Visible to me are buckets that have been shared with me in a view only capacity. So I can see all of those as well. So Forrest asked if this search will search in window. It doesn't. It does pop you out into a new tab where you can conduct your search and then add to the bucket. So unfortunately, you do not have the ability to do that sort of embedded search. Um, so those are our big changes. I'd say this is kind of the biggest set of changes is um, within records. So yes, you can transfer bucket ownership. There's a question in chat about that. I cannot do that with the ones that have been shared with me. I can do that with mine. That was not previously possible. And so this is really useful, obviously, when you have staff changes. So if you have somebody who's going to be retiring and they have a lot of buckets, being able to transfer ownership of those buckets is going to be huge. And I'm sorry I left that out. That's actually kind of a big change. So if I go in here and I select one of my buckets and I transfer ownership, let's try this. I could take this and I could share it with or transfer it to Will. And so now he owns this bucket instead of me. And if I wanted to actually take a look at that, I think I can because it was shared. No, so because it's now his and he hasn't shared it with me, I can't see it. Reports still cannot be transferred in a nice, easy way. It still has to be done in the way that we've been doing it, where you have to the original owner has to set the report to be shareable. The new owner has to log in, locate that in the shared folder, clone it into their own account, and then set it up to run from there. So reports cannot be transferred in the same way that these can. Maybe now that that has been created for buckets, something similar could happen for reports. The reporter is pretty complex in terms of that stuff. So we may be a ways away from that actually being functional. But there is a method. So if you have, somebody retiring and you need to get their reports into somebody else's account, there's definitely a method for doing that. It's just a little bit. You're retiring, Deborah. I didn't know that. Congratulations, but also that's sad. Um, okay, reach out to us prior to that date and we will work with you on those reports because um, I imagine you have quite a few. So we'll figure out who needs to own what and we'll work with you on that process. All right, any other questions related to buckets? This is pretty exciting. for me anyway, and I know some other people are pretty excited about it. So, um, all right, well, let's take a look at the holdings editor then, which is our other kind of big change. And honestly, the buckets is, I think, a bigger change. The holdings editor, the functionality has not changed significantly except in one respect, which is templates. Most of the rest of it is just kind of an aesthetic change that has mostly been done for the purposes of accessibility. So the columns themselves look different. We saw that briefly a moment ago. Um, there are now visual distinctions between editable fields and non-editable fields. So things like the active date that is set by action in Evergreen and cannot be changed, that is now going to look different than a field like circ modifier that you can manually change. There's also a little asterisk that's going to show up once a field has been edited. So in the current version of the editor, when you edit a field in, in the editor, it will change color. But then once you've saved it and you've gone away and you come back, there's no indication that a field was ever edited. You now have the color change in real time when you're making an edit, but then from that point forward, an asterisk will remain so that, if I make an edit and then Will goes in and looks at that same item record in the future, and he sees that I made an edit, now he can see which fields have been edited. It's not, he can't necessarily say this field was edited on this date and this field was edited on a different date, but he can see which fields have had changes made to them. So it does give you a little bit more control over understanding what has happened to a record. Um, The miscellaneous column has now been relabeled as cost and condition, and a couple of things have been removed from that column and put other places so that that cost and condition label makes sense. And then item alerts is the big one that was moved, and that has been moved to be grouped with tags, notes, and statistics because that makes a little bit more sense. So let's take a look at that editor. Oh, one more thing. Also I want to mention the interface is responsive now. So if your screen size changes, that final column may actually show up as a row underneath, and I'll show you what I mean by that. But let's take a look at the holdings editor. So this is what it looks like now. We'll do a quick comparison. Let me get some of this old stuff out to what it looked like previously. So this is the current version of the holdings editor where you have the kind of blue and white fields for everything. And of course you've got miscellaneous over here. It's now been streamlined a bit, condensed a bit. You have this sort of, instead of having the label and then the input underneath, you now have the label and then the input to the right. So more of a standard table format for each column. As I said, you have a visual distinction between those things that can be edited and those things that can't. So if it can be edited, it is now blue. If it can't, it is now black. And on top of that, those that can be edited, when you hover over them, it's like a hyperlink where you're going to get that underline. Obviously, nothing like that's going to happen with those that can't be edited. If I click on one of the editable fields, that will open up the field that can be changed with the apply, cancel, and clear button. So very similar to what we see here. The little asterisk indicates that this has been changed in the past. So if I were to change something that has not, so if I were to change circulation modifier from book to, let's say, audiobook, it would be incorrect. But if I were to do it, then I get the color change. And then if I save it, it's stuck. Try reloading. Oh no. Don't know if this is my internet. The weather is kind of nasty by me right now, but I'm still getting. Can somebody confirm that they can hear me so I know whether this is my connection or. Okay, I'm seeing stuff come through in chat and people can hear me. Okay. Then I don't think it is my internet, so it may just be Evergreen itself. This is terrible timing on that. Um, let's just try again. Okay, it's reloading. Yeah, it could be my internet, and so just it's just a matter of how much I'm trying to do in one moment. Okay, I'm back in it. That save that I attempted to make did not work. You see it still set as book here, so we'll try one more time. I'm not going to force this issue if it causes another problem, um, just because. Um, there we go. It worked that time. Oh, but I'm not seeing I'm seeing that it changed, but the asterisk is not showing up. So I'm not, uh, it may be that I need to leave the page and come back to it. But that is a very small detail, so we're not going to spend too much time on it. Yeah, I think that may be what's going on is that the changes are still pending. Um, we'll be doing some other things, so hopefully that pops up at some point. So we've got our miscellaneous column, of course, now is cost and condition. And then this is what I was talking about with that responsive design. My alerts, tags, notes, and statistics would normally be a column, but because of the current resolution of my screen, rather than making everything really small, instead it's moved this last column down below. And if I change the resolution of my screen, I can get it back up to a column. And I think actually, if I really change the resolution, I'm going to further move stuff down. So by taking it up to 150%, cost and condition has moved down as well. So um, just some things to be aware of in terms of the responsiveness of the page itself. Um, so the cost and condition used to include the alerts option. That is now in the alerts, notes, tags, and statistics column. Functionally speaking, most of this stuff is about the same. So you're still going to get the same types of pop-ups for these that you were getting before. Um, so a lot of this, for the most part, is just kind of aesthetic and accessibility related. But the one thing that is a big change in terms of functionality is templates. So of course, in the current version, when you go into the item attributes portion of the holdings editor, you see the template, everything about templates up here at the top. So you can apply a template, but you can also create a template by putting in all your attributes and clicking Save Template. I'm just going to leave that behind. Now all of my template stuff except for the application has been moved to a new tab, the administration tab. So within this tab, I can do everything related to templates. Um, so basically, I can create new templates in this tab. I can edit and delete existing templates as well. And you could edit templates before, but it wasn't an obvious option because there was no button for it. Basically, you had to apply the template, make changes, and then resave it, which wasn't super intuitive. You now have this ability to kind of see the templates you have, select them, and then edit them. So you can make changes in a very sort of intuitive way. Just like previously, something that has been set for the template will show up as green when you're working with it. So that is still, you're still going to get that indicator of what is set for the template versus not. Yes, they are still available through local admin, and I'll show that in a second because that has changed a little bit as well, Deborah. You can also, this is exciting for me, choose which templates you want to export. In the current version, when you export templates, you simply export all your templates. And so the person that is importing your templates is going to import all your templates. If you have one person who is going to be just doing adult fiction and you'd like to share the adult fiction template with them, you can just share the adult fiction template with them because you can just export that one and they could just import that one. So I'm excited about this. You also have the ability, of course, if somebody already has all your templates and you've just created a new one and you want to give them just the new one, they can just get the new one. So instead of simply exporting everything, you can now come into your list of templates, and from the actions menu, you can choose to export all or you can export selected. You can also, of course, import from this particular interface, from the administration interface. And then, of course, because you now have this angular grid of your templates, not just the drop-down menu, you have the same abilities that you would have in any angular grid, which means you can filter and sort your columns. And so what that means is if you have 25 templates, but you're only looking for those templates related to fiction, you can filter it so that the template name is just fiction. Like all the filters though, capitalization does matter. Let's try adult because there we go. I'm not sure why the fiction one didn't work. Um, so those are the main changes to templates within the Holdings editor. Deborah asked about the local admin version of this, and it is still there. So I can go under local administration. And I can go into there it is. I was skipping right past it visually. I can go into the Holding Templates editor or the legacy, which means that if you are used to working with this the way it has been, you can go into legacy and you're going to be able to see it in the older format. But you can also go into it and see the updated format. And everything that you can do from the administration tab, you can do from here. And that is basically what I have for you today. We've got about 25 minutes left though, so happy to answer questions or go over anything in more detail. And then obviously if there are questions about the Holdings templates, we can discuss them. Well, I would love to take credit for this, but all I did was put together the webinar. Most of this upgrade, of course, comes from the wider Evergreen development community, but Llewellyn Marshall is absolutely on that team and has worked really hard as part of this. And then, of course, Will has been doing a great job of communicating everything to do with the upgrade through Basecamp and everything like that. He and Llewellyn have put together sort of a working list of bugs as people are discovering them, and just really making sure that we're ready for this upgrade. So we've got a really good team behind it this year and every year. But so the shelving location group that came in last year's upgrade and did not work very well. So we actually removed it, and I don't think it has been significantly addressed in this upgrade. So I don't think we intend to continue. So I think we intend to continue keeping it hidden. But are there is anybody else on the Cardinal team want to weigh in on that? Yeah. Okay, that's what I thought. Um, they're not there's some significant bugs in how they function. They just aren't working for us. Yeah, so it's not going to be visible when it goes live. It may be the first day or so. Just I'm not sure if that's something that Mobius is aware of. but we will be turning it off. And yes, Deborah, I agree that Evergreen's making great progress with upgrades. I think they're really targeting what they're doing with each upgrade and being very thorough in how they're addressing issues and stuff. So very happy with, I'm very excited about this upgrade, and I have a lot of hope that it's going to go smoothly. If you are interested in looking at some more details about any of this, I will put the links to the release notes in the chat. So we are going to 315. So these are the release notes specifically for 315. We are going to 315.5, I believe. So this section up here for 315.6, I don't think is going to apply to us. They just put it out, I think, last week. So we are not comfortable going directly to it. I'm also going to put the link for the release notes for 314 because of course we're going from 313 to 315. So all of the upgrades related to 314 will also be coming in. So you can take a look at these as well. And I will put in the direct link to the upgrade notes that we have so far here. So you can kind of look at, we've had a lot of people in the community testing this, and I really appreciate everyone that has been taking time to go into Next and play around and figure out what's working and what's not. I think that that is going to make this upgrade, that's a key reason that this upgrade I think is going to be really successful, is that we've had so much input from the NC Cardinal community. As those issues have been reported, we have been listing them in here, including information about their status and all of that. Once the upgrade comes through, we will continue to list any bugs that we come across once it's live. Once something goes out at scale and it's being used in a kind of a real world environment by a lot of people, things are going to crop up. So as that happens, we'll continue to post them in here along with the status for those of you who would like to really participate in this process. One of the things that you can do is that when there is a link to a bug, and that bug affects you, if you click on that, that's going to take you into the bug reporting system that is used by the wider Evergreen community. And if you create an account within this system, you have the ability to say that a bug affects you. And so you would just do that by clicking, this bug affects 6 people. Does this bug affect you? You can do that. And then you can confirm that it affects you. And that will add heat over here. So this little flame will basically, the hotter it is, the more likely in theory it will be to be addressed. And then you can also keep track of it. So you can see what the developers are doing with it. And, as there's chatter about it and stuff like that, it's discussed down here. So that's something that post upgrade, I definitely recommend keeping an eye on. Anything else related to this? Just be aware that there are certain things that people may bring up that we are just not able to change at a certain point, or that the issues found within it are kind of bigger and more complex. And so it's going to take a while to get the community working on that because it may involve some pretty serious overhauls. So things like that, may not be quickly addressed, but we'll certainly keep them on our radar. Right, well, I really appreciate everyone being able to be here and the great questions and input and everything. I'm going to get this recording posted up to YouTube. So those people who were not able to attend either session can watch the recording. There is another session on Thursday. It will be the same content, but if you want to see it again, you're welcome to come again. Um, and in between, if there are questions, feel free to post them up on Basecamp. And then after the upgrade goes live, if you run into problems, if you run into bugs, if you just have questions, we are all on board to be as communicative as possible after the upgrade and to try to address things as quickly as possible. So share your thoughts. Otherwise, I will hopefully see all of you at future events, and thanks for being here.